Too Much Film School presents Public Domain Theater. Tonight's episode, Sherlock Jr. Here's your hosts, Casey and Matt.
Welcome to Too Much Film School. I'm Casey.
And Matt.
And today we're going to be watching Sherlock Jr. from Buster Keaton from 1924.
Yes, this is another one of those public domain movies that is simply very, very old. In fact, we were debating this week whether we were going to watch this or Girl Shy, because the late, great David Bordwell has on his website the best film of 90 years ago. And so a long time ago, I read his top 10 list for 1924, and two of them were Sherlock Jr., which I've seen a bunch of times, and Girl Shy, which I hadn't. And we settled on Sherlock Jr. because it's the funnier of the two. I think we just liked it better. So hopefully you guys like it when we watch it together.
Girl Shy has a maybe better and more iconic chase scene finale. It goes on for 10 minutes plus of just back and forth intercutting, and it's you've probably seen it in montages and things since, but the first 40 minutes are harder to get to. It's a lot less gags per minute than Buster crams into Sherlock Jr. But with that, we can go ahead and get started.
So you see here, right at the beginning in our little title card, a Metro attraction. Metro Pictures is the first M of MGM. It's Metro Goldwyn Mayer. So Metro was bought by Lowe's, the Lowe's theater owner. He bought Metro because he needed more movies for his theater, just he needed production to run. And it wasn't, they weren't making enough movies for him. So then he bought Goldwyn Pictures, and then he brought Louis B. Mayer on to be part of the company. All of this was happening while this, you can see here, controlled by Lowe's Incorporated. All of this was happening while Buster Keaton was making this, and it was trying to be released. So it was one of those like corporate merger things going on where there was a lot of complicated business stuff going on, and they didn't focus on releasing the film like they should have and marketed it and stuff. So this is actually, at the time, one of Buster Keaton's least successful solo feature films. And I should clarify, by the way, this seems really short for a feature film. We usually think of feature films as being something like, at least 80 or 90 minutes, if not more. But back then, the technical definition was more than 40 minutes. And I think actually for the Oscars, you still qualify as a feature if you're more than 40 minutes. So this is 45. It's 9 reels. So like just under the line of being a feature film.
Maybe they padded it to get into the contention. We'll say this is a very classic shot. The mustache, the book is very readable. And I've seen it around in discussion of film history. But it is good to know the history of the Lowe's and Metro before they were part of MGM. And that companies sorting out business bureaucracy in the middle of someone trying to make an artistic product is not new to Hollywood now.
Right. Yeah, like we're going through this, depending on when you watch this video later on. Amazon just bought MGM, and there's all kinds of business going on with the James Bond movies and stuff. Yeah. It's been going on for 100 years.
Warner Brothers seems to change tech company hands every 2 years at this point. I will say this title card and this editing, I had watched this in film school probably, and then watched it again before this, but the girl's father had nothing to do. So hired man, like, who are these people? Like, it just cuts away from him sweeping to the girl, and it may just be, we expect, there's going to be a girl. I'm like, okay. But we were, also, I had thought of the film Chaplin with Robert Downey Jr. showed a lot of the behind the scenes 1920s comedians. And I remember the first scene in that is Max Sennett, like Chaplin gets hired, comes out to Hollywood, wanders through a shop, and he's in the background. And they're like, oh no, did I ruin the shot? He's like, no, and they have David Duchovny places Raleigh, his editor. And he just pulls out a woman tied up on a train track. And they just put 2 yards of that in to cover the mistake in the movie because they didn't want to throw out the shot. And so disjointed editing, I'm like, there could have been so many reasons that they're just like, let's cut to the girl now. We were in the middle of a visual gag. It didn't work.
Yeah, it's very there was still this is that time period when they're still sort of figuring out. We have the basics of continuity editing down by this point, but they're still sort of trying to figure out, like, how much information does the audience need?
Yeah.
But also this character, the Buster Keaton character, was pretty established by this is, I think, the 8th or 9th one. Maybe it's the 7th one. It's late there. People have been watching this guy for years, so it doesn't take much to establish. It's Buster Keaton. He works at a movie theater. That's like
there's a
all that
girl.
they needed.
Yeah, I will say though, and again, this is for the time. It just said the local chic, and I'm like, okay, like a Middle Eastern guy. For the time, I was like, I looked up what would that have meant to 1920s audiences, and again, we just saw him walk by, but we have no info on him. Of the 1921 Rudolph Valentino movie, The Sheik, was about a Lothario, not necessarily bad. He was just a romanticizer of women, and so to audiences, they would have been like, "Oh, this is the Playboy,"
Right.
But I will also say some good classic visual gags. He's searching through. He found $1. He's excited because he was going to go buy a box of chocolates for his sweetheart that we cut away, and he just found $1 to get enough. But then this woman came back saying she lost $1. So now he's like, "Fine, I'll go back. No, I'm going to buy the $1 one." And then this woman starts searching through. I will say I showed this scene to my kids, and they immediately knew what was going on. I'm like, "What's this woman going to say?" And they're like, and then again, his reaction here tells so much. Without
it works. Yeah. The younger woman, just to rewind a little bit, is played by an actress named Doris Dean. Now, here's some very dark behind-the-scenes drama that happened. Buster Keaton got his start working with Fatty Arbuckle, who was a sort of a half generation earlier silent comedian who was very popular. Part of his bit was just that he was very fat. And it's one of the earliest movie scandals.
Yeah.
Fatty Arbuckle was at a party with a young lady who died. The details of her death and stuff are very debated. He was put on trial, and it missed trial 3 times before he was acquitted on the 4th trial. So a lot of people believe that he actually was in some way responsible for her death. Some people say he wasn't, and they were just going after him because he was famous. Whatever. He was friends with Buster Keaton. Couldn't get a job. Couldn't catch a cold in Hollywood. On this movie, Buster asked him to come in and help with the directing, to help his friend get some work while simultaneously giving him some he doesn't have to be like running the set all the time. He was given a screen name.
Will Be Good, I think.
Yes. So it was sort of a silly.
Comedians are gonna comedy everywhere.
Yeah. So, but now there's rumors around the shooting of this because Arbuckle had lost all his money and all his sort of respect and stuff. He spent all his money on lawyers, so he was getting drunk a lot and not showing up on time. So Buster was having to direct stuff that he didn't think he was going to have to direct. And you can look up. I'll post it in the show notes. There's videos online debating which scenes were directed by Buster and which ones were directed by Fatty Arbuckle. And it's almost certain that Buster Keaton shot a large chunk of it. He possibly shot all of it, but there's certain scenes that sort of seem like have Fatty Arbuckle's touch. But it's one of those, we're looking at 100 years later and we're comparing different films, and some of their film, both of them have lost films, and it's a kind of who knows really kind of thing.
Yeah.
But like again, these sorts of things happen now, and they happened 100 years ago. Nothing has changed throughout film history. But I can sympathize. So on the one, like, I guess we don't know what happened at that party, but I can certainly sympathize with somebody who's like, this guy got me into Hollywood and I'm now like rich and famous. Like, I owe him. Like, you can sort of sympathize with Buster Keaton's position on that, and trying to help out a friend, giving him a job and letting him work. But apparently this was one of their last times. But the reason I brought this up, the girl who lost the $1 was Fatty Arbuckle's future wife. I think they were engaged at this point.
Nice.
But Yeah, so it was that sort of hey, there's a young woman with a bit part, or there's a young pretty actress with a bit part. Well, I wonder how she got the job.
Yeah, again, Hollywood now, Hollywood then. I would say, oh, now there's a lot more stuff comes out. The Me Too movement eventually aired a lot of dirty laundry. You would think people can get away with things now, but even back then, like you said, Fatty Arbuckle's case was publicized. There were sensational stories of what happened, at his Hollywood parties, which were near USC. Like his mansion is still, I think, there on Adams. The red one across from the church that's up on Figueroa and Adams, around there. So I believe that's where
I did not know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's a bit of local history there, but yes, agreed. The scandal around him doesn't repay the death part was very extreme, and understandable why that might have broken out of the silence that everyone had around film stars and celebrities. But I was thinking of also Chaplin, who I brought up, the Robert Downey Jr. biopic that shows a lot of the interesting ways that film was being developed and everything at the time, and especially with comedians. But also that film from the 90s glosses over Charlie Chaplin's own scandals of, again, meeting and then marrying his, at the time, 12-year-old when he first met her, co-star, then getting married at maybe 14 or 15. So that film treats it very rose-coloredly, like, oh, this was a scandal, but she was old for her age. I'm like, no, that's not.
On a positive side of Hollywood family and Hollywood royalty and stuff. So we just saw Buster Keaton do a pratfall on a banana peel. It's a classic. It was old then, which is why they sort of subvert it by having Buster trip on his own banana peel. But that's Buster's dad in the scene, the dad in the movie. And they were, his parents and him were vaudeville actors. They were the great Keatons or the tumbling Keatons or something like that. I should remember, but I forgot. But like a lot of times you hear about child actors having horrible relationships with their parents, because terrible things happen and whatever.
Becoming the ward of a billionaire after their parents are killed. Yeah,
like none of that happened. He apparently still got along with his parents. They were he liked farming with his dad. He gave his dad, it's not a huge part, but like he needed a dad part, and it's not his father, it's the girl's father, but like whatever. Yeah. But his dad is like taught him everything he knows, and it's fun to hang out with dad on set. So like, again, you can sort of see that's a healthy relationship that you would wish every sort of acting family has, and it's not.
It seems like the rarity.
But yeah. I don't know. I like to see that a guy like this who he had a troubled later life, but like when he was doing well, he was actually trying to help friends and family, and I think that's that's admirable, and I like that.
Like his persona on film, and that's the part that I talked about. Chic would have meant Playboy or something, but now we've seen in the film that the other man has stolen the watch, sold it, is framing him, whereas we established Buster's character is honest when he returned the dollar. So again, he's had a star persona of being the not only pratfalling, but skilled, but also being upstanding American, like every man, even if he is poor and not the one that the girl would automatically choose. So I think it's good to hear that parts of that are based on actual character, and agree that it's a rarity when growing up in the film system is the best for the person's psyche, persona, moral compass, all of those things. I think though the Marx Brothers had, again, varied lives and marriages and children and a lot of things, but they also, again, at least worked together and stuck together as a family through vaudeville and then through film success. So I do like learning those parts about history as well, as the diegetic, on screen, what we can read as a viewer.
Right. I do. It is sort of, although when you talked about being the honest guy, the thing that gets him in trouble is the one slight bit of dishonesty where he tries to impress her by making his $1 box of candy look like a $4 box of candy. Like that's the thing that gets him in trouble. If he hadn't done that, if he had just been honest with her, he wouldn't. Nobody would have lined that up with the $4 watch.
Right.
And yeah, so
I,
it
I,
is largely it's a little tiny morality play, which is not,
right.
nice.
But also it shows how well constructed the films were in that there's nothing wasted. There's not he did the $1 to $4 to make himself look better. It lines up with the watch. It's nothing's wasted. And again, this also is a classic scene and a bit of physical comedy where
he used to do that. He learned this from Buster Keaton, Buster Keaton learned this from Fatty Arbuckle. It's a good gag. And I've seen versions of this. I was watching The Extra Girl did a version of, which was a few years before this, I think, did a version of this, and it wasn't as good because the camera was super shaky. This is one of the scenes where they believe Fatty Arbuckle filmed it because a later project he worked on did this same gag on this same lot. I don't remember which lot it was. But they suspect that this was that because he just reused his same joke. This one kills me every time. I don't know why. Like, you just don't see it coming. But it cracks me up. Yeah. So it's, the way silent film comedies work a lot of times is they're less concerned with, like, they get the plot going, but then it's just like, what funny stuff can we come up with?
Right.
And a lot of times it wasn't even super planned out. Like this, unfortunately, is one of Buster Keaton's most dangerous stunts. First of all, running on top of a train is a terrible idea. But that's Buster Keaton. He's hanging from the water spout, and the water sprays down. He actually broke his neck.
All right.
He did not know it at the time, but like years later, he saw a doctor, and the doctor was like, "Hey, you've got like a weird, healed fracture here. When did you break your neck?" And Buster Keaton was like, "I never broke my neck." And they like looked at it, and I don't know if they X-rayed or whatever at the time. And he sort of went back and was like, "Oh, it must have been that time I got hosed down by the train, by train water
hundreds
tower.
of gallons of water pummeling me into gravel and steel train tracks."
Yeah, but he's a consummate comedian. He gets up and keeps going.
Yeah, no, I will say that looking to him again for the modern footprint of someone like Jackie Chan doing his own stunts and visual gags, sacrificing his own body for decades, Jackie Chan owes a lot to Buster Keaton and silent film stars who did the physical comedy. Again, he took it to the next level with martial arts and a lot of the performance, but agreed that it's not for the faint of heart and it's a bit dangerous. So,
yeah. I love this. This is when you're talking about efficiency. It's like the actual plot we don't actually care that much about. We just want to see the funny things happen. So like the guy just walks by and that's solved. The whole
perfect time.
The case is solved now, and yet like there's still we're not even halfway through the movie.
Oh, I will tell you spoilers because we're about to embark on like a 15-minute dream sequence. But I will say, when you talked about the train being a visual gag, like a lot of the dream sequence delves into what bits can we fit in. I love that he is a projectionist because it shows us a bit of the history of film. Again, the live orchestra playing. The projector behind him has steam coming out of it. Like it's such machinery and everything that went into the early days of film. And again, just then we get into the double exposure here, the dream sequence that are showing some of the techniques that they were refining and developing right now in their earliest uses. So,
yeah, that was one thing that made Buster Keaton sort of different from Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd. Was so first of all, he had the dry delivery, the like not making a face, but he was way more interested in the technical stuff than they were. None of them had anything like this, with the double exposures and the what we're about to see, probably the most famous part of the supercutting. But like he liked playing with the camera as much as doing the actual like stunt work, which is kind of what made him different than the rest. And I think that's arguably why maybe at the time he wasn't the most popular one. Like Harold Lloyd was actually the most popular one in the 20s in terms of box office. But Buster Keaton is the one that people like you and me remember because we appreciate the film technique. So it's what history remembers isn't necessarily the most popular one because of that. And he's got a ghost hat, which is just hilarious. Okay, this part baffled me for the longest time. Speaking of like film technique, I was like, how in the world do they have this projection screen and he walks into it, which we're about to see? How did they project it? How did they make it look like a projection? And he's able to step into it. That like they can't possibly be a projection. There's no cut or anything. And it turns out all they did was they slightly overlit the bedroom set and they slightly underlit the theater.
Yeah, it's just
all that it was.
They went, oh, it's a movie.
Brighter in there.
Movie, but it's actually just a stage play at that point with a proscenium around it. So
and it only, and it's interesting, like the way it tricks your eye. You could only do this in film. You have to be thinking in terms of a two-dimensional image, because you can't do it in three. If the people in the theater can see that it's being faked, they can see that it's three-dimensional, and so you have to think cinematically, and so he had that vision that others don't.
Right, and again, this part, then your eye and mind is tricked with, wait, how did they're now cutting between sets and things. And
at that point, yeah.
Right, but that's the part I was saying of, at this point, they are on to let's do visual gags. In the story of the pearls that's going on screen, there's no reason for them to just start randomly cut to a street. It gets wild and wilder of the desert.
Oh, it does sort of line up though with what you talked about at the very beginning, where we cut to the girl for no reason. Like these shots are kind of unjustifiable, but we go with it because it's funny.
Right.
And this is the way they did this. It's actually there's some debate depending on who you talk to. Different people have said different things. Buster Keaton claimed they use like surveying equipment so they can measure like precisely the precise distance and stuff and like the right elevation and whatever. But I think the cameraman said they printed the film and they cut the last frame and lined it up. But the problem with that is that they had reflex cameras at the time. They couldn't actually look through the lens. And so lining up the frame you'd be slightly off. And these aren't even slightly off. So I actually kind of suspect that they maybe did both because it's a weird thing to make up. So I feel like they must have used the film frame as like a guide and then used the precise measurements to make the cuts really work. And I do bet that they just ran around town and were like, what's the funniest thing we can do here? Like, what can we cut to? And then they just did it. But it must have taken like nowadays you film it and you have it, but they had to process the film and develop it in order to get that frame to match it later. So this must have taken days or weeks. Like they must have been doing other things while they were getting this particular scene done. Because it just doesn't. It's too technically involved at the time. It would still be involved now, but it'd be very hard.
You do all this in a computer.
This shot, I love this shot. It reminds me of Coraline when Coraline, because it was a 3D movie back when that was big. But like the first bit of it is 2D and then they go into the other world and it becomes 3D, and it reminds me of that. Like it's not 3D, but you can see the dimensionality of it as the camera pushes in, and it's such a visual cinematic thing that like you can't do that in still pictures, you can't do it on stage, you can't do it in anything other than film. And so it's like that's part of why Buster Keaton is well remembered. That's why this film in particular is well remembered as that kind of stuff.
No, agreed. The move in, and again, there's the Wizard of Oz or the Searchers or those ones used a lot of the pushing through into a new world. This one, was not as expansive as Oz, but going from the theater watching a screen into the world in a dream sequence. We're now 5th level down in the Inception tiers. But again,
it is odd at this point, like narratively, like you pointed out, like why are we watching him? Like this detective story, first of all, doesn't parallel his story in the slightest. But like, well, no, actually, it's not true. It's the missing pearls. But
aspirational.
Like,
he is, picturing himself as the suave, cool detective.
Right, but she's already solved the case. Like we know the solution. So it's just such a weird, like, what does this have to do with anything?
I think again the fact that it's a literal mind screen dream sequence of him at his star persona of being the everyman, but here's a fictionalized him that's picturing himself as this great detective. And I will say, actually, I really like the treatment of it because thinking of the time and these ludicrous booby traps that the bad guy has set up for him are all like Bond villain level. And again, 1924, well before Bond ever existed, but clearly aping Sherlock Holmes because he's Sherlock Jr., but an American version, of a what would be suave detective handling ladies and clues and bad guys. Like this isn't the Arthur Conan Doyle version of Sherlock Holmes, and like I said, I reminded of James Bond. I'm sorry, I'm wearing a literal James Bond shirt, right? But before James Bond ever existed. So the interpretation of what would the American psyche want to think of as a suave, cool detective at that time is this. And again, is where I think obviously James Bond, still British, like Sherlock Holmes, but this could be why someone like James Bond was so popular in America. Is this suave, intelligent, person taking on people with elaborate, ridiculous traps and things.
Yeah, it is funny how we've always regarded British people as being suave, sort of inherently. I like that the vial is labeled poison just in case. I do find it odd they didn't set that up. They set up the axe and they set up the bomb.
Right.
But you expect there to be three things because it's a comedy, but they did not set up the poison until immediately before. And I think feels like on the day they were like, oh, we need a third thing.
Yeah, or again, it's leaving his partner in the dark. So this part is back and forth because he didn't share it beforehand. And or he was so confident that the other two were going to work that he didn't have to explain his third backup plan.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that was the intention from the beginning. It just struck me as odd to not have a setup the way the others do.
Yeah, but again, it goes to ludicrous space with the grenade pool balls.
That also, this is one of those, like, the movie star has a hobby, and so they want to put it in the movie. Buster Keaton was apparently a good pool player, and could do tricks and stuff. And so this whole sequence is just because he wanted to play pool.
Nice.
And he's really doing it. There's no effects. He's really doing it. So what he would do apparently was that he would practice with just the cue ball and whatever ball he was hitting on that particular shot. Yeah. And he would practice that shot a bunch of times. And then they would film it with all the rest of the balls, knowing where it would go. He would put chalk on the balls so that it would draw little lines and he could see, okay, we could put it here and we know we're going to bounce around it and not actually hit it as long as I do it
nice.
correctly. So all of these shots are really possible. Like if you my dad played pool and showed me some things, and if you hit it right, the ball in the middle really won't go anywhere. There's all kinds of little things like that. So this is there's not like fake balls or certainly not a visual effect, but there's nothing. It was just Buster Keaton playing pool really well, which I think is kind of fun.
Nice. No, I will say nowadays with your TikToks and things, the number of videos that are someone throwing a card through two water bottles and it landing, in one of those mannequin hands, and then they celebrate. I'm like, I can see 485 cards on the ground from this. Just shows that you have a lot of free time where you tried this for 3 days straight until it happened. With film, they would not have been just burning celluloid for days, until he got it right. So I agree that this, as much as the physical comedy, things like this trick shot of him jumping it over or going around.
Yeah, it's a cool shot, but I've seen in real life. I've seen people do that. It's pretty impressive. Some of these shots, by the way, you'll see they're slightly faded and stuff. This was one of those movies where bits and pieces of it were lost for a time and then were recovered, and so they were stitched back together and restored as best as possible. But some of the shots are kind of muddy and washed out just because of the passage of time.
No, I think.
But for the most part, the print that we have here It's from we're watching it on Criterion, but it's also on Canopy. And I say this every time: if you have a library card, get Canopy. They have just the best, picture, because you can watch this on YouTube, but it's a ugly, crappy version. Watch it on Canopy, or if you spend money on streaming, Criterion is always a good source for these kinds of things.
No, agreed. That I think the Criterion one even has an explanation of restoration that went into it, to where they analyzed like 7 interpositives, because they wouldn't have the negative, it wouldn't have survived for 100 years. So they use interpositives, which the first pressing off of the negative to make copies with. They had 17 different versions of them, and they compared each frame to be like 15 of the 17 have to line up for them to use a selected take, line, shot, or cut. Like, so that level of scrutiny they were doing. And I think some of the lost ones, yes, they then went from further down, a third copy of a copy generation that Harvard or someone had stored to replace a scene. But the dedication is impressive for film restorations.
Yeah, and it's why we're able to, you think about these things lasting forever, and they don't necessarily, unless somebody takes the care to it. And in this case, like, this movie's so old. I understand that it's funny. It is weird that it doesn't go off. Like, there's no rhyme or reason for why it does or doesn't go off. It's just because it's funny. Like, that's the only rule.
And it's in a dream. I will say also, there's a title card in his own mind in the dream, but it's because he's watching it on a movie theater that he's now entered. So
this is a funny gag with the mirror. Oh, so Gillette, Gem, and Everready are apparently razor blades, and that's the joke. So he's always ready for a close shave, or whatever the line was. That's why so Gillette is a name for an assistant, and then the other two were it was a dumb gag. And this is also apparently a parody of a movie that no one's ever seen from about a couple of years before the release of this. But that's not an effect. They built one wall next to a train or a trolley car. This is a great stunt that we're about to see. It's also just sort of a funny gag, the chasing after the guy.
I was like, again, seeing a lot of these views, exteriors as well from the time, to see Hollywood, or again, Eagle Rock or Glendale, that hill would have been at the time of 1924. And it's just part of not just film history, but local history for Los Angeles and Hollywood.
Yeah, and there's a weird sort of gap of time, because here you took a camera and there was a cameraman who was cranking the film, and like it wasn't that, it was, you still had a production, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Later on, when you had giant Technicolor cameras and you needed lights and all kinds of stuff, there was less location filming once sound sort of comes in for a stretch of time through the 60s. So like this is sort of the golden era of silent film location shooting.
Yeah.
And that's just a real life, train crossing, and he don't know if he got permission to do that. Dropping down and the timing and all that stuff.
It was run and gun, guerrilla cinema.
Yeah,
again, the 70s.
The cameras were still
the
cameras were still pretty big, so you couldn't really have like handheld, but it's very close to run and gun as they'd be able to at the time. So yeah, an interesting thing to observe overall, we think of meta jokes, like movies about movies, as sort of a more modern thing. Like it was a very big deal in the 90s when we were, growing up, like movies like Scream, like movies about movies. So this seems crazy that this movie is about movies. It's like people are in a theater watching him in a theater, and it's super meta, but they were doing that almost from the beginning. But this is not even nearly the first one. 2 decades earlier, there was a movie. So there's an urban legend, and it's not true at all, but there's an urban legend that when the train arrived at the station, the very first movie was ever played, that people in the audience were terrified that the train was going to jump off of the screen and run them over. That's obviously stupid. It didn't what happened. It was just an exaggeration of people's reactions. But there's two different movies in the early 1900s. I think like literally 1900. I don't have the years in front of me, but there was a movie called The Countryman and the Cinematograph. And then the next year, Edwin S. Porter, who's sort of a bigger name, made a movie called Uncle Josh at the Moving Picture Show. And both of the movies were essentially a country bumpkin going to the movie theater and seeing, literally they did a train arriving and him panicking, and then a shot of a pretty girl and he gets all excited. And it was these, it was sort of sort of that urban rural divide that still exists, where they were making fun of dumb hillbillies and stuff that they don't understand how movies work. But movies within movies have been a thing, not literally from the beginning, but very close to the beginning.
Right.
So this is not actually confusing for an audience in 1924. They've seen this before. They've seen versions of this.
Yeah. And I did look it up. Uncle Josh was 1902 and The Countryman was 1901. So year by year.
This gag where he jumps through the window and is suddenly dressed. From my research, supposedly that's a real vaudeville thing, and he really did jump through the window. I'm not sure I believe that. I feel like that's still an effect, that the see-through wall was one shot and the outside was a different shot, and they were, stitched together. A hard time believing that you could actually do that.
I think, again, quick change artists and things from stage production, but agreed that I don't think we see the level of how disheveled he is until there's a cut. So he could jump through and be encloaked in essentially a blanket, but then a shot of it passing for a woman in a dress, I think could be where the cut is.
This is a real gag. This is not an effect that they would do on stage. So the guy who's against the wall, his assistant, is actually like leaning on a platform, like an ironing board behind that wall. Buster Keaton dives under him, and then the guy drops down. So his shoulders stay in the same place, but he's like, it's like he's lying on a surfboard kind of thing. And then Buster Keaton dives through, and then he drops down and walks away. And apparently people would do that on stage. So that was an old vaudeville trick.
Yeah.
And so, here we get to the chase that you were talking about earlier. It's not as impressive as the one in Girl Shy, but it's still pretty cool.
Yeah.
And
it's different levels of Girl Shy has breaking down everything. This, he ends up on the motorcycle. Spoilers for 5 seconds from now. And it's an impressive bit of balancing, an impressive bit of film work where they clearly probably had it hooked to a picture car. But Girl Shy, he goes through 12 different conveyances, and they end up in different levels of disheveledness. The classic gag of starting out and the car getting more and more broken, or horse and carriage, stagecoach, the wagon breaking away, and he's just got the horses. So classic still.
This
gags.
Real quick here. This Buster Keaton really is able to control the motorcycle while he's riding on the handlebars. But the stunt where the assistant falls off, that actor wasn't good at pratfalls. So that's actually Buster Keaton falling off the back of the motorcycle in that one shot. He put on the chauffeur outfit and stuff, and you can't tell because you're looking at the back. But for that shot, Buster Keaton fell off the motorcycle, and then he goes into this. Here we get some of that fast motion stuff that, like, it's not my favorite because I feel like it's impressive even without it. Yeah. But, it's what they did at the time. It doesn't
even at half speed, those cars were going 7 miles an hour. So if they had done it, they sped them up to 15 miles an hour or whatever, it would have been a full speed at the time. So I think it is, again, still impressive. Here's also some view into the time of stag party being a bachelor party, and they would tie each other up and do tug of wars or something out in Griffith Park.
I think it is a tug of war, yeah.
Yeah, but so again, that just getting drunk and doing that count as a bachelor party in the 1920s.
But that's a real stunt too. Like, those guys are really being dragged. And that's just. And I like how they're just drunk. They start punching each other.
That's how you
that's
know
totally what would happen. This is a visual effect. For the longest time, I did not realize that that's what it was. I thought it was just like good lens work. But if you look really closely, you can see the seam. So the top half of the frame if you look really closely, the wheel is not all the way around. It's going so fast you don't see it. So the top half of the frame was filmed separately, and then the bottom half was they timed it and stuff. So it's still cool, but it wasn't an incredible stunt the way that some of these other things are. I don't even know what this vehicle is, but it makes me laugh every time. Like, did they make it just for this, or like what is happening?
It looks like out of a Richard Scarry book with cars and trucks.
Yeah, right. Exactly like that. This is great. I love this. This is the trick here. If you can't, it takes you a second to sort of figure it out. It is in reverse, so they somehow got the train to go backwards, but the whole thing is reversed, and it's a little bit bumpy, but it's not as bad to me as reverse as fast motion, because I think like sort of the bumpiness of it sort of hides the fact that the technique that they're using, as opposed to the fast motion, which is just so transparently just the cameraman rolled, undercranked it, and it's just, that's the one thing. It always bothers me in these old movies. I just hate the undercranking, but everything else, all of the stunts, all of the stuff, all the gags that he does are really cool.
I will say I find it more disconcerting when a film has either through later versions had their frame smooth, or just for some reason I think one of the Harold Lloyd ones I remember watching, it starts off and it's incredibly smooth motion. Now if they just on stage were able to crank it with perfect synchronicity, and it no longer looked period piece to me. I'm like, this movement looks too modern for this film. And it was an uncanny valley of, I want the herky jerkiness, so I know it's a silent film. It suddenly became too real.
Yeah, there was I actually recently watched a documentary about the Passion of Joan of Arc, and there's apparently debate about what is the proper frame rate for that. And one thing that I learned is that it's all hand cranked, but the camera operators had great pride in their ability to record at a steady rate, and they're human beings, so they couldn't do it perfectly, but like the better you were as a cameraman, the more smooth it was. And so there was some question on Passion of Joan of Arc of what was the intended frame rate, because sometimes it looks herky-jerky and sometimes it doesn't, and anyways, it's a whole thing. But so that sort of stuff, like nowadays, once we sort of settled on 24 because of sound, frame rate had to be consistent, so it became mechanized, it became settled at 24 frames per second, and that's just what we do now.
I will say this bit I'm impressed with. We talked about the chase scene with the, again, girl shine, these films having chases, but the humor around the car degrading and then keep going. I mentioned James Bond earlier, has clearly submersible cars throughout its history. But it moves like it's a mad world where it's just road films based on how can we take a car and misuse it, abuse it, and the characters still keep going in a race across country or things like that.
I do wonder in a scene like this, because it's 1924 and there was no OSHA, like this woman in a dress, like how safe is she? like
you said, Buster Keaton at least takes on the most dangerous roles himself. So again, they probably swapped the actress out for.
Oh, that's true. It might not have been, because they did have the backlit camera. But yeah, that scene, I'm a little bit worried about the actress. This bit, the meeting with the girl and watching the screen. I guess this must be, in order to get to the conclusion quicker, like she had to solve it before his dream was over. So I think that's why they had to put her solution before the dream, and then we just have the funny dream sequence and then come back to the actual story. So I think narratively, I guess they felt that they had to do it. I feel like we would solve that problem a little differently now if we had a full 90 minutes of this story. But the conclusion is still, I also think they probably would make her more active in the dream. But this ending is just such a great, like, I love the way that he's so innocent that he has to check the movie repeatedly to find out what he's supposed to do. And it makes me laugh. Because it's so cute. Like,
yeah, I think again, we love a good-hearted simpleton. He's just naive, like I said, innocent in the ways. So we root for him, and we want to see him succeed, even in love. If not detecting. Because, like you said, she pretty much suffocates. In the real world, he's not a very good detective.
Yeah, he didn't do anything to solve the plot of this movie, which is, you know, it's fine because it's just funny. But like, yeah, I feel like the rules don't really matter because it's so entertaining. I mean, like honestly, like who would say the movie's called Sherlock Jr. and that dream sequence it doesn't happen until like halfway through the movie.
I think, yeah, again, setting him up with the mustache, the book, and then running through once the watch is missing. I think, yeah, again, it's his childlike sense of he's a detective, and then the dream sequence allows him to play that out. But here's the final gag of.
Yeah, this gag. This is. I mean, there's innuendo here. It's not the most overt, but like he obviously knows, you know, what's happening. You know, like like the kids are watching this have no idea. They're just, you know, it's a mommy and a daddy. But like the adults can watch it and understand the innuendo at the end, and his reaction to, oh, is that what I'm supposed to do next? It's a great
the head
gag.
Scratch is again his childlike innocence of they didn't spell out how to connect those two.
Yeah, there's an extra step there that he's not aware of, and it makes me laugh. I like that ending.
No, agreed, and that's part of I think what makes it classic. We talked about the film techniques, his commitment to comedy and physicality, and a lot of the history that went into even making it. But I do think the reason it lasts and things like that are the innocence, the kind-heartedness, you know, and the moral compass the character has, even if he's a buffoon, he's a lovable one, which again we see come up in comedy again and again. The Simpsons or any shows, you know, Family Guy, but Archie Bunker and a lot of those things. Americans love a well-meaning, lovable buffoon.
Yeah, when you say that, I'm very American in that way. Like I don't like the mean-spirited comedies where the person is a jerk. Like I'd like him being a goofball and it all coming right in the end, and I think that's a perfectly fine. And as far as like it's still sort of lasting, it's great that you showed it to your kids that like they still found the dollar gag funny and stuff. Some of it's probably a little slow, but like for the most part, it's still entertaining 100 years later for most people. And it's probably more entertaining if you watch it on its own without us talking over the whole thing. So
wow,
hopefully you do that. And then watched our whole podcast and learned something about it.
We should send out summer reading materials, and everyone has to watch it before the stream starts. So next time we'll be checking on you.
But it's a fun movie. It's a quick, it's a short one. Technically a feature, but you know, it's a quick 45 minutes. It's like an episode of television or like a double episode of a sitcom. And it still holds up because he's still funny and he's still lovable, and everybody except for that Sheik is you know, cool. So yeah.
That's the other thing. Actually, we didn't see any comeuppance. The Sheik, we did not see marched off in handcuffs or so.
I am a little curious. I don't know what $4 is. I mean, his watch, like that's got to be, you know, unpleasant to lose your watch. But like, is that a hanging offense or is he? Is it like is it a major crimes? He's going to prison for 5 years, or is it, you know, just don't come around here anymore?
Apparently, again, the watch was not made of gold or anything because it equals one medium-sized box of chocolates. It was the step up.
It was that was a very large box.
Okay,
that was
the one he had. All right.
Yes. Also, I don't know how expensive chocolate was back then. Like, how easy was it to obtain chocolate?
Between wars, so I don't think rationing was on.
I did think that box was comically large. I was like, that's more chocolate than you ought to give to like one girl. Like that's one to share. That's
it's
like
implying,
the box that Buster gives her
around.
isn't appropriately sized. What?
The big one, you have to stick around and help her eat it. It's lengthening your date. So that's the trick.
There's one sort of side note about that whole thing is I've heard someone point out that like in romantic comedies, a lot of times there's like the other guy And one of the difficulties is when the other guy is a jerk, somebody that you don't, like and don't want the girl to end up with. Part of the question is like, well, why is she wasting her time with him at all? Like, why does she have bad judgment? And it's very difficult to pull off the other guy being likable while also not wanting him to end up with the girl. And the only movie that I can think of that does that well is Liar Liar, the Jim Carrey one from the late 90s.
Yeah.
Carrie Elways is the other guy, and he's a dork, but
Right.
he's likable. And like there's nothing wrong with him being like an option on her like romantic, card. Whereas this girl spends a little bit of time with that guy in the bedroom. I mean, they don't do anything obviously, but like it is a little bit like, why did he did bring you a big box of chocolates, but like Buster
I
Keaton
thought
is right there. Are
I thought that
you
was a
like,
parlor room. It's a table in front of them, and he hands a banana. So I thought it was a dining room. They went in from a entertaining room to a dining room to
I
go
thought
over
they
the
went from the
chocolates.
entertaining room I thought that was a bedroom back there, and that's why there
I,
was curtains.
no, I think old-timey houses just had curtains in between the foyer and
Oh,
the
okay.
dining
Well,
room.
in any
So
case, she was spending time in entertaining
yes, agreed.
both of these gentlemen, even though one of them is clearly
I think,
a womanizer and kind of a jerk, and
but
Buster Keaton being a nice guy.
right, we see that. She has not seen that. He has a facade going, and until the watch, it crumbles. So maybe that's the comeuppance we imagine off screen. Is he's not being hanged for a $4 watch, but everyone will know that he's actually a petty criminal, and all the women around town will tell each other to stay away from him. So he lost out. I will say the other reason Liar Liar I think works is I don't believe Jim Carrey and his ex-wife are ending up back together. They're just going to stay in town so he can have visitation on his kids. So she's
No,
still, I think, with Carrie
the
Ellis.
very end of the very end of the movie, they're kiss. He blows
Oh,
out
right.
the candle, and they kiss.
All
And
right,
then
never
they
mind.
said, "Did you wish that we would get back together?" And he says, "No, I wish for a Nintendo."
All
And
right.
then they make eyes at each other.
Then yes, I
Um,
agree. That's a bit of a Carrie Ellis is perfectly fine. Just not as funny
um,
as Jim Carrey, but that's hard to
no,
beat.
yeah, like it's just like he's just not the star, but it's not denigrating him in any way. And I suppose Mrs. Doubtfire, like uh,
Pierce
James Bond,
Brosnan. Yeah.
Pierce Brosnan,
It
just
all comes
bad in
back
that.
to James. He is not, and that's
No,
the same one where again he's trying to just get visitation back. I don't think he ends up with Sally
no,
Fields.
that one you're right. They don't end up together, and
Right.
I remember that they specifically wanted to not have that happen
Yeah.
because there was sort of being raised by divorced parents and stuff was something that people were dealing with at that time. Um, I don't know what they were dealing with in 1924 in terms of marriage. I feel
Family
like
dynamic. I'm always
they're just trying to
amazed.
not die of the Spanish flu at that point.
I'm always amazed. I feel like the progressiveness. Anytime they're like, "Oh, she's dating," multiple men are coming to her house and giving her gifts and things. I'm like, "Oh wow, that's progressive in my mind." Even though they are holding hands on a fainting couch with her father in the next room, so it is still a bit old timey courting. But the fact, just a lot of times in these, there is the idea of him being, the playboy character, the chic, and or women having gentleman collars and a lot of these things to where I'm just like, okay, that's a progressive, open relationship level of
Yeah, I mean
sure.
the assumption is that it's her choice. Like nobody's
Yeah,
forcing anything on her like that, which seems healthy. And she's active. She's the one who solves the plots.
exactly. So it's actually she's Sherlock Jr., the titular character.
She's the secret Sherlock Jr. the whole time. Um, I feel like if you did a modern remake, you would probably extend that sequence and intercut like him doing goofy stuff in the dreams and then her actually figuring it out like
Right.
as like the sort of real world
Just
plot.
following clues, talking to the pawn shop.
Yeah, you would make it more complicated, but like you would do that. And his investigation would be sort of a goofy, mirror image of that.
Yeah.
But they were shooting a 9 reel film. They shot it in like January of 2024 and it came out in July of 2024. Like I can't imagine like making a 5 minute movie in that window of time, let alone a 45-minute movie with stunts and special effects. Like
Yeah.
these are complicated effects for the time. They
Yeah.
like from inception to like I think they were writing it in December if I remember correctly, but they were shooting it in January and it came out in July. And like you hear about movies that are they're in development for 10 years and they shoot for 8 months and they're in post production for 2 years and all of that. He made 2 movies in 1924. Like there's another one that he came out. Is it Steamboat Bill Jr.? It's one of those. But yeah, like he has 2 movies in 1924. But this is the sort of, I think, the more iconic one because of all the visual effects and the moviness of it.
And the studio system came along and upped the ante on that. I think we've talked about, the Howard Hawks and those ones that would have, director Cary Grant starring 4 movies a year. But that was once it was a factory, the Dream Factory, and they would have, here's your location, here's a soundstage, here's everything on the studio lot. The fact that he, like we said, was going and doing a lot of these directing, starring in, and going to locations makes that very impressive.
Yeah, there's a lot of like making it up as we go along. We're here. Can you think it can hang off of the train gate and fall into the car? And when they did, Metro was bought by Lowe's and became MGM, and that was the very beginning of the studio system and the factory and all of that. And he did not get along with Buster Keaton did not get along with that very well. It was too regimented. It was too, you have to hit your dates. You have to turn in the footage at a certain time. You have to have everything written out and then go and film the thing that you wrote. And it was just sort of
too many rules
beyond his ability. Like that wasn't how he made movies. And he did continue making some things. And of course, he's one of the people in Sunset Boulevard who's playing cards. But like I think he did like 2 or 3 other movies that are like really Buster Keaton movies. And then it kind of went downhill after that, unfortunately. There is also, I do recommend if you have, I don't know what streaming service it's on, but if you have access to the Twilight Zone, there's an episode of the Twilight Zone where Buster Keaton travels through time, and it's fantastic. And it goes from, I think it's from the silent period to like the Old West or something. But it's very meta, and part of the whole gag is that it's Buster Keaton and people know who he is. The character is not Buster Keaton, but everybody knows who the
persona.
Is. It's significant. Yeah. It's interesting because he does talk, but it also plays off of sound and silent movie and all that stuff. So if you can look up that episode, Twilight Zone with Buster Keaton, it's one of the better episodes. I mean, it's a great show anyways, but that episode in particular is great. But we're not going to watch that next time because it's not in the public domain. We're going to have to watch a different public domain movie. I don't think we have anything lined up for the next one.
But the Twilight Zone will be on your quiz, so the required viewing before our next session.
Yes, you should. But thank you guys for watching. Leave a comment if you had any thoughts or if you had any if you have a suggestion for next time, maybe. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and all of the things we're supposed to say for the algorithm. Please do those things. It helps us a lot.
Thanks for watching.